evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
Welcome back to another episode of Mahoning Drive-In Radio, the only podcast, as far as we know, dedicated completely to the love, history, and preservation of drive-in culture. I am joined today. Well, first of all, I'm Mark, General Manager at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater in, as I like to say, Lehigh, Pennsylvania. And joining me today as a co-host is projectionist, owner, Mahoning icon, Jeff. Say hello, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff.
Excellent. fellow Laugh-In fan. And joining us today to discuss the films contained within Exhumed Films and Mahoning Drive-In Theater's Saturday, August 12th, shot out of Canon Films 35mm Dusk to Dawn show is Mr. Cannon himself, Austin Trunick, author of 2 books so far on the films of Canon Films, entitled The Canon Film Guide, Volume 1, 1980 to 1984, and The Canon Film Guide, Volume 2, 1985 to 1987. And I hear tell of a 3rd volume in the works. A 3rd volume coming. Austin Trunick. Welcome, Austin.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for inviting me back. I am so excited to get back out to the drive-in. I've had such a good time there last summer.
Yes, you came out for the Canon Films trailer show that we did. And you, if I'm recalling this correctly, and you vended yourself right out of all the books that you brought.
Yes. Yeah, I ran out that night. That was I had actually talked to Paul Talbot, another Mahoning guest veteran, author of the Bronson's Loose books, and he advised me, he says, bring more books than you think. And I did, and it wasn't enough. So I'll have more books with me this time. I learned my lesson last summer.
So for all of you who missed out on getting a signed copy of one of Austin's books, come on out on August 12th, because he will have more. Now, what is the ETA? And I'm not pressing you. There's no pressure here. What is the ETA for Volume 3?
It's a long ways off still. I am trying to temper expectations because this is a big book. It's a lot of movies. It's actually more movies than the other one because these were Canon's direct-to-video years, I like to call them, 88 up through the end of in the mid-90s. And there are a lot of movies in here, and a lot of ones that even I was not that familiar with before writing them. But I'm looking to wrap it up sometime late next year. So maybe Christmas 24 or early 25 is what I'm currently shooting for, and that's giving a very conservative estimate.
That's, hey, why rush excellence? The first 2 books are hefty volumes as they are. So anybody who picks up the first 2, just savor the flavor of the Canon film history of those years. And then by the time you're done, it'll be time for Volume 3. So we're here to talk about the films that we will be screening, as I said, on August 12th at this Dusk Till Dawn 35mm Canon show. I've heard of these movies. I've seen, I think, 2 out of these 4 movies, but I know, honestly, nothing about what it took to make these movies. So Austin, we're going to just, I was saying to Jeff just before you came on, you are like Steven Seagal in Under Siege. We keep you and your intellect locked in like a meat locker or a freezer in the basement. And when it's time to unleash hell upon the Canon ignorant, we just open that door and stand back. I don't know if that's the best analogy for what you do, but it's one I'm going to stick with.
Oh, so, I love it. I love it.
you're just gonna be doing that slappy fighting, knowledge laying down like nobody's business. So the first film we're going to screen is one I've never seen, and I know it spawned this like insane like Canon legacy. This is American Ninja from 1985, starring Michael Dudikoff as the titular American Ninja.
He is the only soldier.
Who is he?
Who is capable of defeating the secret Black Star Army. A soldier who has become a master ninja.
Your destiny, my son, awaits you.
The deadliest art of the Orient is now in the hands of an American ninja.
Starts Friday, September 20th. Consult your local listing.
Had Dudikoff done much before this? Because I always just associate him with this film series.
He had done a little bit. And what's interesting about this franchise, and this, in particular the first American Ninja movie, is that it turned him into an action star. It really changed the trajectory of his career. He was a comic actor for the most part. He's best known before this film for Bachelor Party with Tom Hanks. He was in that movie. He was on a sitcom. He had a recurring guest role on Happy Days. So he was mostly known for small parts, but comic roles. And this was a movie he went out for. He went out for the audition and he almost walked away from it because there was a really long line and they had the people in there kind of showing that they could do moves that looked like martial arts, even if they didn't know martial arts, if they could convincingly punch and kick and things like that. And he almost walked away standing in line just because it was long and he didn't think of himself as an action star. But he got in there and Mike Stone liked his look, the martial artist who had choreographed this movie and worked on quite a few of the ninja films for Canon.
And who I'll always point out stole Priscilla Presley away from Elvis. Just
yes, his other claim to fame. Introduced Canon to ninjas and stole Elvis's wife. Yeah, he got Michael in there, and director Sam Furstenberg liked his look. He kind of thought he looked like James Dean. I don't know how much I agree with that, but that's what he thought, and he got the role. And it launched a franchise, and it launched a homegrown action star for Canon. Michael Dudikoff became primarily known for action films from that point on.
It's so funny because I never thought of him as I guess I would never realized that he was a comedic actor. He's the Canon action guy. So it's funny to think that much like Joe Piscopo's career could have gone if he had pursued, the action fully, just a comedic guy. So this was a theatrical release in '85, right?
Yes.
Were all the films, I mean, we're jumping way ahead in the history of American Ninja, but were there 5 or more of these films when all was said and done?
There were 5 American Ninja movies, and Canon had done 3 ninja movies before that with Shokasugi. And this was originally intended to be this was going to be Ninja 4. So this was going to follow Ninja 3: The Domination, a wonderful movie you guys screened last year.
Right.
Had a great crowd reaction. This was going to be Ninja 4 for a while, and because Shokasugi left, they kind of decided to start fresh with a new series. So it became American Ninja. And yeah, there were 4, I would say, actual full American Ninja movies. American Ninja 5 went direct to video, and it is only an American Ninja in title alone. It was developed as an entirely different movie, and they called it American Ninja 5 to sell them a few more copies to video stores.
So these films, I lived in a small town when these films were coming out. So a number of them did play my local multiplex, but I don't remember seeing ads even in the larger city papers for some of the middle to late period American Ninja films. Did they get wide national US releases or were they more regional? Do you know that?
The second one got a pretty darn good release, but the third and fourth were smaller and smaller. Those were movies that came when Canon was really in the midst of their biggest financial troubles. So the size of the theatrical releases shrunk. These were more about the international sales that they had already collected the money for and getting them into video stores as quickly as possible. So there were a lot of cases where with the later American Ninja movies where you would have it in your video store and then your cheap theater would get it, or many times it was a drive-in. Like if a drive-in picked up one of Canon's bigger movies, it would be the second movie kind of sent along as the B film. You would get the new Chuck Norris and then American Ninja 3 as your second showing movie.
Looking back from where I'm sitting right now, it's a pretty fun double feature.
Yeah.
Like a Canon double feature, even a Canon B movie, as we said before we started recording, good or bad, how you view these films, they knew how to make an entertaining movie. They were like almost calculatedly entertaining. And even the bad ones are just like, they're never boring,
No, I've said this before, but you rarely find I'm making bunny ears quotes here, a traditionally good film in the Canon library, but you'll have a hard time finding one that's not entertaining.
So speaking of entertaining, the second film we're showing that night is we first ran this on film, as you know, I would say strangely pristine copy, but then I think this movie really didn't get a lot of play in its day, or at least it didn't get a lot of play after it came out. 1987's Masters of the Universe.
A battle fought in the stars now comes to Earth.
Police! Nobody move! I think I'm gonna need some backup.
A battle for the power.
Kneel before your master!
To be masters of the universe. Dolph Lundgren is He-Man. Frank Langella is Skeletor.
Let this be our final battle!
Masters of the Universe, rated PG.
Now playing at a theater near you.
We originally played this as part of what we called Second Chance Weekend for films that originally kind of had failed or weren't critical successes, and we paired it with Howard the Duck. And both, again, strangely or not, just pristine prints that we ran that night. So I'm guessing that's what we're getting again. How did Masters of the Universe came to be? I remember hearing some things about reasons why things are so different in this, and this is a Masters of the Universe He-Man movie that's really bears very little resemblance to how the characters or the world of He-Man looked in the cartoon.
Yes, so this was a movie that actually was in development for almost 5 years before Canon finally got hold of it and put it out. But Mattel, it came independently through Mattel, who recruited producer Ed Pressman, who recently passed away, but is very prolific producer, but best known for, I would think, for the Conan the Barbarian movies. So he was developing it with Mattel. He attached Dolph, he attached the director Gary Goddard, and they were shopping around. This is a film that also had the script by David Odell, who wrote The Dark Crystal. So it's an interesting bunch of talent behind it. But Mattel's reason was they had this toy line and had a cartoon, and the toy line was doing great. The Master Universe toys, He-Man. I grew up watching He-Man on TV. And they thought what could push it to the next level and kind of keep those toy sales going would be a live action movie. They were looking, I think, a lot at the toys, the toys that were produced out of Star Wars, the small action figures. And to compete, they tried to make this big budget live action movie, and they shopped around at studios. And it's funny to think this as we're here talking during a summer when one of the biggest new release movies this summer is going to be Barbie, another Mattel property. But back then, people thought of making a movie out of a toy was absolutely ridiculous. Studio heads, all the big studios turned them down.
Was this the first movie based on a toy?
It's one of the first. It would have to be,
because when you say that, yeah, I think about it now. We've had a G.I. Joe movie and any kind of intellectual property that anybody has heard of, whether it's a board game or a movie, a theme park ride, or a greeting card series turns into a movie. But back then, it really wasn't as common for live action.
No, not at all. And that was really hurt them at that point, because they had this whole package put together and nobody wanted it. And it eventually came to Canon, came down to Canon and another studio, and Canon outbid the other studio by a slight amount, but it was still about only half of what they wanted to make the movie, what they thought they needed to do it justice, the vision they had at Mattel for it. But it also came very late. This was at a time when the cartoon was losing popularity. A lot of the young boys who had been buying the action figures in 1982 were starting to grow out of them. So those cards were kind of stacked against Mattel and Ed Pressman and Canon at that point, because they were working with a property that was no longer as hot as it had been had they actually been able to get the project really moving several years before. And then by the time the film came out, the cartoon had actually ended its run, and the toy line had only produced one more set of action figures inspired by the movie, and ceased production. So we got the big screen live action He-Man movie during the very last gasp of He-Man's popularity, as the show had been canceled along with the toy line.
I feel like I remember seeing full page ads on the back of comic books for this. Right around the same time, I was seeing full page ads on the back of comic books or in the comic books for Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Am I wrong in that the releases were was it the same year?
You're correct. They're both summer of '87.
And there were two movies that as a kid I had zero interest in. And I had been a big Superman fan. I loved the first 3 as a kid. And for whatever reason, when 4 came out, it just felt like it was, this all ties into what you just said about He-Man. At the time, for me, it felt like the time had passed for that. And
right.
for He-Man, apparently it was too. I didn't realize it was after the cartoon was off. I just remember thinking that it was sort of the last thing I remember being a He-Man thing around that time.
Right. It had really come at the end for He-Man, and rather than being what Mattel had hoped, the thing that would kind of revitalize interest and spawn a new generation and next age of fans, it kind of put the nail in the coffin for it for a few years. He-Man, of course, came back, and they keep relaunching it, keep bringing toys, but for a while after this movie, there was no new He-Man stuff for years.
And the storyline is not what you would think of as a typical He-Man adventure on whatever planet he was on and all this. It was what I always thought of as a kid. Even I could see this. If there was a time travel movie or a space movie and they come from somewhere really exotic to Earth in the present day, that's cheaping out.
Yes. Yeah.
They've come to modern day Los Angeles where we can just point the camera outside. And that's kind of what this movie did.
It is. And that was a cost-cutting move. Once they realized that studios weren't going to give them the money, and once they realized that they had to do this with Canon, who at that point were just hemorrhaging money, they set it mostly on Earth in a California suburb. So that would be a nice, easy commute, even from Hollywood, from Los Angeles, for the cast and crew.
So they could save money on gas, basically.
Yes, and the one thing they get around it, because the movie, it does have some things that really go well for it, and I think they kind of spent their budget in a smart way by beginning and ending the movie in the Castle Grayskull, in Skeletor's throne room. And it was at the time the largest indoor set that had been built in Hollywood, I think since the 50s, since the old CinemaScope, Technicolor days. And it was a huge, just one set. I mean, the rest of the movie is cheaping out, but there's one big, beautiful, gorgeous set you see at the beginning and end of the film. And it's amazing. Just a funny bit of trivia, but as they were shooting the Skeletor scenes on the next section over on the next soundstage right next door, Michael Jackson was shooting the Smooth Criminal video, and the He-Man crew got to go watch him do the lean and everything.
Are there any pictures of Michael Jackson with Skeletor or He-Man?
Not that I've seen. I hope they exist somewhere in somebody's archive.
You'd think he'd want to do that.
I'm sure. I'd be shocked if Michael Jackson didn't get a photo sitting in Skeletor's throne, holding the sword of power.
Amazing. So the film came out. What was the success of this? Because I remember it being advertised on TV and I remember it playing in theaters, but I don't remember. I just sort of remember the fact that it came out and then it was on video.
It was disappointing, to say the least. They spent a lot of marketing. It has a beautiful Drew Struzan poster art, which was rare for Canon to really splurge on an artist of that caliber to do their poster. But it was disappointing. But this came at a time where Canon was running out of money. They very a story that I tell in the books in more detail, but they literally ran out of money at the end of shooting this before they were able to finish the film. But Canon had to send a guy to go there and literally pull the plug, shut off the power to the soundstage where they were filming at midnight because they couldn't afford to keep shooting.
Wow.
So if you get to the end of the film, and I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a fight, but the fight is filmed in a dark room with a color wheel and a little bit of fog. That's not so much a style choice. That's a choice that is based on they're shooting in a dark room with a color wheel because everything's running on an extension cord, and there's only like 4 or 5 people left in the crew who are working for free at that point to actually finish the film.
Wow. No.
Wow.
Was there ever any interest in Canon, probably doesn't make sense financially, but of doing a follow-up to this, or did they just basically say it was expensive, it didn't do well, we're moving on?
Well, there was not much interest on Mattel's part, but Canon was interested. They announced a Masters of the Universe 2 at Cannes that year before this came out. When Dolph was present, they had a champagne reception for Masters of the Universe, which I smile thinking about. But Dolph at that point did not want to do the film. He was embarrassed by it. He did not want to do a second one. So he kind of gritted his teeth as Menachem was making the announcement. But they went as far as actually starting to build sets and cast. This was the sequel, Masters of the Universe 2, was going to be directed by Albert Pune, who sadly we had just passed away late last year. But it was going to feature Dolph wasn't going to be in there. It was going to have the surfer Laird Hamilton taking over the He-Man role. And because this one was even cheaper, the whole idea is that He-Man has come to Earth and disguised himself as a football player, as a quarterback, and is kind of fending off an invasion in his disguise. They were going to use every excuse they could not to show the He-Man-y stuff, the stuff you expect, the aliens, the foreign planets, and things like that. If you felt the first movie was cheaping out, it was going to go take that a step further in the second one.
The most un-He-Man movie imaginable.
Right. And they took it. The movie actually, they got as far as being ready to shoot it. They were going to shoot it back to back with their Spider-Man movie that they had been working on for years and years. But when they decided that making those two movies would be too expensive, they canceled them. They had a lot of the crew there. The costumes were already in place. Sets had been built for Spider-Man, and they repurposed them. They turned those into the movie Cyborg. So if you watch the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, 1989 Cyborg, you'll see that the bad guys are wearing the costumes from the first He-Man movie. A lot of the cast members, a lot of the bad guys, a lot of the side characters in that film are played by people who had been cast by He-Man, had traveled out there to be in He-Man, only to have it canceled, and just to make use of them. So Cyborg was what they came up with really fast to kind of collect on the sunk costs they had on He-Man 2 and Spider-Man.
That's amazing. I had no idea that. I mean, I was asking just out of the blue sky if there's any idea that there'd be a He-Man 2, and you're like, oh yeah, they were just about ready to literally pull the trigger on the camera to make the film pass through it. That's that.
Yeah, they were
amazing.
just a couple weeks away from starting shooting on He-Man 2.
And the cast for Masters of the Universe is not bad. I mean, you've got Frank Langella, who's a very respected actor, buried under makeup, which is not terrible makeup. It doesn't really look like the Skeletor of the toy or the cartoon, but it's a pretty cool, creepy looking Skeletor. And I'm blanking on her name right now, is Evelyn.
Meg Foster.
Meg Foster with those eyes.
Oh.
As Evelyn. So you had good talent there, just not the most dynamic film of all time, I guess.
No, I don't know if you've ever had something as blue on the drive-in screen as Meg Foster's eyes are when you show this movie, because but it's a great cast.
That's a color palette term. Nobody's taken advantage of that. No, cinephile has ever produced like a nail polish or a shoe or something with Meg Foster's eyes blue.
It's one of I don't know who that comes up with the Pantone colors, but when they have the new color of the year, they should look into that.
The Eyes of Foster, not Foster Brooks. So the next film we'll be discussing here is a film that we talked about a little bit when we were talking about Ninja 3, because it shares a star, and this is 1984's BREAKIN.
BREAKIN! And just don't stop. Here comes the movie that's fresh and hot with high energy, dancing to the beat with a scratch mix sound that comes from the street. This movie is unique. Don't be mistaken, you've got to see BREAKIN.
BREAKIN, rated PG, starts Friday, May 4th.
I noticed I was watching, it was one of the Death Wish movies. Was it Death Wish 4? There's a scene where Bronson goes into bust some bad guys in the back of a video store, and they're just posters for all Cannon films all over the walls. And I believe BREAKIN is one of them. I've totally taken out of the movie at that point because I kept freeze framing, going, I can identify that movie, and why is there 5 posters for BREAKIN in this room? So 1984's BREAKIN.
Yes, you're right. In Death Wish 4, that scene is actually shot in the Canon offices to save money, and so they decorated it with the movie posters they had around. It's a lot of Canon advertising in Death Wish 4. But what I like is that all of those movies exist within the world of Paul Kersey at that point. Paul Kersey could have seen BREAKIN.
I would like to think he did more than once.
BREAKIN was one of the 2 biggest hits that Cannon ever had, the most profitable movies. It was #1 for quite a while in the US. And it is a movie that came about in a stupendously Cannon fashion. Menachem Golan's daughter was walking along Venice Beach and saw breakdancers and pointed them out to her father. And he thought, let's make a movie about it. So I hear this story there from people who worked in the Cannon offices, but Menachem's walking up and down the aisles through all the offices shouting, who can write a breakdancing movie? Who can write a breakdancing movie? So that's how the movie began. The movie, from the time that day where Menachem Golan finds out that breakdancers are a thing that exists to it being in theaters, was less than 12 weeks.
Oh my God.
It's incredible. The movie was playing in May. It was written in no time at all, shot. Cannon did something that worked really well for them, is they actually just went down to Los Angeles and started recruiting breakdancers. Who are your best breakdancers? Who are your best rappers? Things like that. Who are your DJs and things like that? Let's get them to be in their movie. So a lot of it is, these are authentic people who were well known in the community of breakdancing, which really works in the movie's favor. You have Boogaloo Shrimp and Shabadoo, two of the most, if the closest things to a household name when it comes to breakdancers. But there's a story that, again, I love, that year at the Cannes Film Festival, 84, the movie was number 1 at the time in May of 1984. So they're over in France, and Menachem is taking a meeting with Andrei Zulawski, the director of Possession and several other very highbrow, very non-canon-like movies. And he's trying to talk him into shooting a Brooke Shields movie for him and shooting it so that it'll come out that August. And Andre is saying, I can't do that. No one can shoot a movie in 12 weeks. And Menachem slaps his hand on the desk and points at a poster he has hanging up of BREAKIN. He says, I had that idea 12 weeks ago. Now it's the #1 movie in America. You can shoot a Brooke Shields movie in 12 weeks. So it's just one of those things that, gosh.
So what was the period of time it took to shoot it? Because, I mean, you said from the idea to the release. I mean, between the idea and shooting, there's a little time. And between shooting, there's post and prints and releases. Mm-hmm. I mean, was it shot in a week, 2 weeks?
It was just, I believe, 4 weeks. They shot the movie in, they wrote cast and printed it. The reason why it was moving so fast is because Beat Street, another studio, had been working on for some time. It was Orion who was working on Beat Street, and Menachem found out about it, about a week into the developing BREAKIN, and he then pushes the release date up. He pushes their whole calendar up because he is wanting to beat Street to theaters. So he had he had a reason to rush them. He wanted to be the first breakdancing movie into theaters because he didn't think anybody would want to go see a second one. And I think that was the case. This was a #1 movie for a while, and the soundtrack blew up. It got a lot of coverage for Cannon, and Beat Street while arguably being a better made movie, was the second to come. It was it was not able to really match the excitement for breakdancing that BREAKIN did.
And that was a genre that didn't really spawn more than a handful of movies, from what I recall. You had BREAKIN and BREAKIN 2, one of the most quoted film titles of all time, or paraphrased film titles of all time, and Beat Street. And I off the top of my head can't think of too many more than that. Was Body Rock? That was another one I think that came out around the same time. The Lorenzo Lamas breakdancing movie. It really was quite a flash in the pan kind of fad. And we talked about this before. BREAKIN 2 came out the same year, didn't it?
Yes, 7 months almost to the day after BREAKIN was released. So both of those movies were made very quickly, and Canon wanted to cash in, and BREAKIN 2 made less than half of what BREAKIN did, and it's amazing that it made that much. Just thinking in 1984, you had no shortage of breakdance films. You were probably at the market was saturated with breakdance films. Yet BREAKIN 2 still did all right.
It's and its title lives on. Its title is referenced in our culture more often than you'd think a breakdancing film title would be. It's just one of those things that people reference it all the time, probably which have never seen the film.
Yeah, that's has to be the biggest part of the BREAKIN legacy, is that it added Electric Boogaloo to our lexicon.
So the final film we have to discuss, the final film that the bleary-eyed viewers will see at the Shot Out a Cannon show, is a film I've never heard of, and I've always heard spoken of in tones of the Bronson filmography, and people going, that one goes to some dark places. This is KINJITE, Forbidden Subjects.
For kids with nowhere else to go, the streets are the last stop. One cop is determined to make a difference.
Hurry up! I'm gonna put you out of business. What are you, completely crazy?
The worst kind of crime needs the hardest kind of cop. Charles Bronson.
That's justice.
KINJITE, Forbidden Subjects, rated R.
Starts Friday at a theater near you.
Yes, that's 1989. Yes, you are absolutely correct. This is a dark, dark Bronson film about child trafficking. So just a word of warning, but it is very much a Charles Bronson movie outside of the kind of what the villains do in it. And it was the last Charles Bronson movie with Canon. And this was after they made many, many films together.
I was going to say, I remember this being sort of late in his tenure there.
Right. He actually, after making this movie, kind of went into a mini retirement that only lasted a couple years. He ended up coming back for a short burst of movies in the mid-90s. But for a while, it was his swan song.
What's the story behind this film? I don't know much about it. The director, the writer, how it came to be. I remember it getting a theatrical release, and I remember seeing it on the video store shelves. So I knew it wasn't like Death Wish 5 that was more or less a straight to video thing.
Right. This did have that theatrical release. It was a film that actually was brought to Canon through Bronson's agent, Pancho Kohner, and it came from a script by Harold Nebenzal, who was a third-generation film producer, a German-born, mostly novelist, screenwriter, and movie producer. What's amazing is this is the 1980s, and he was a third-generation film producer. And to have a third generation at that point, you can tell how far his time in the industry goes back, because he was not a young man. He had been working since the 50s. His grandfather was actually the co-founder of Nero Film, the studio behind films like Pandora's Box, Fritz Lang's M. Wow. And his father, after fleeing Germany ahead of World War II, ended up coming to the United States, buying a Poverty Row studio, Producers Releasing Corp, where he was the head of Producers Releasing Corp, where he produced works by many of his other fellow notable European expats at that time who were really getting their first work in Hollywood. Douglas Sirk made movies for him, Edgar Ulmer. He launched the career of Billy Wilder, one of his first film credits, by financing People on Sunday. in the 1930s. And of course, Harold would follow in his father's and grandfather's footsteps. He had served in the Marine Corps in World War II, and then came back and worked for MGM, mostly as somebody who was kind of a liaison for their foreign productions. But he did have credits. He was a producer on Cabaret, on Ingmar Bergman's The Serpent's Egg, Billy Wilder's Fedora. So he had done all these things before he got into screenwriting and wrote what is arguably Charles Bronson's sleaziest movie.
And this is the man, who starred in 10 to Midnight. So that's pretty cool.
Yes. This is a movie that actually, though, it came out, it went into production during the writer's strike of 1988. We're just like what we're living through right now. But it meant that Harold Nebenzahl was not available to make edits that Cannon needed. So the director and Bronson's agent and Bronson himself all sort of rewrote, added scenes. So the original script for this movie doesn't have quite as much action, but thanks to the other people other than the screenwriter writing action scenes for Bronson, we do get a magical moment, such as when a stuntman standing in for 68-year-old Charles Bronson is hanging off a crane, shooting gang members with one hand and hanging onto the crane with the other.
I can't wait to see this. This is
yeah. There is too. I won't spoil anything here because it deals with the movie's ending, but if anybody wants to come talk to me at 4:30 a.m. or whatever time this movie's wrapping up on the early hours of August 13th, I can tell you how they changed the ending and what the original ending was meant to be, because it's drastically different than what they'll see at the drive-in.
Oh boy, I'll absolutely do that. I'm in it to win it for this show. I've never really seen. Well, I've seen, I think, BREAKIN was probably the only one I've ever watched all the way through. Masters of the Universe, I think, when I was a kid. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this show. And looking forward to having you out again, getting to see you in person. Most of our dealings are, through the internet or through a microphone like this. And I believe you're going to do introductions for the films before each film to give everybody a little bit of information and context. And if you're not, I just said it to the world. Guess what? You're doing introductions.
I'm so excited. That was one of the peaks of 2022 for me. So I can't wait to be back in the projection booth and speaking to the microphone.
Absolutely. And so that's what we're going to show on August 12th for their Shot Out of Cannon show. Tickets are available at mahoningdit.com. But before we go, I want to put you on the spot in two ways. There's two things I didn't even say I was going to ask you about.
Okay.
So it's easy. So there are two documentaries about Cannon Films. There is Electric Boogaloo, and there is produced by Menahem Golan, I believe himself, The Go-Go Boys. I trust you've seen both of these documentaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which do you like better?
Well, I'm going to cheat here. They're both great. They both kind of... So Electric Boogaloo probably gives you a bigger picture of what Cannon was. And it gives a lot of people talking about them. A lot of people who had bad experiences sharing those. Go-Go Boys is your much more positive. They
authorized story.
Yes. But Go-Go Boys has a lot of wonderful footage, a lot of great archival stuff, a lot of interviews with Menachem and Yoram themselves that they were not involved with Electric Boogaloo, because when they found out it was being made, they decided to make their own.
That's the Cannon way.
Yes.
I'm sure they were hoping to get it out there first too.
Yes. Yeah. They just wanted to beat it. They got to beat Beat Street. That's how it goes. But they're both, I think they're both essential. And I tell people, before you read my books, you really should check out both of those movies. Electric Boogaloo is so entertaining, so well put together, and so funny. There are some hilarious stories in there. And then the Go-Go Boys has some great access to some documentary footage and archival footage that is also absolutely worth seeing. So you can actually see what it looked like as Golden Globus were kind of working, and what the offices and how chaotic they were.
See, I felt the same way, which is not to say this is a trick question, but some people say, Electric Boogaloo is the way to go. Go-Go Boys isn't as good. And I thought they were they were like two puzzle pieces that interlock. There's some overlapping of content, but they each have things the other doesn't. And it is really interesting to see the canon story from the guys who were canon themselves, and to see them now, to talk about how they had a falling out, and to see them, in the same space at the same time again, which was kind of dramatically very interesting and touching.
Yeah, there are moments in the Go-Go Boys that bring tears to my eyes almost, because it is a story of these two cousins who were inseparable, started this empire, had a falling out, and were brought together again for a final time by this documentary. And these two old men kind of watching through. There's a great moment in there where they're sitting in a screening room watching clips from all of their old movies and kind of just taking a trip down memory lane. It is a very beautiful moment. And like, you can't see The Forbidden Dance without seeing Lambada and vice versa. That's how I feel about these documentaries. You do need you should check them out, both of them.
I would like to hope that in your daily life, you do use that analogy from time to time, saying, chocolate and peanut butter, it's like Lambada and The Forbidden Dance. You gotta have them both together.
Anytime I sit down and have a serious talk with my kids, there's a good chance that I will make a reference to Lambada or The Forbidden Dance.
Bless you, sir. The other question I had was, if you were to program your own Canon Dusk Till Dawn show, and I edit this show, so you can take as much time as you want. If you could program your own Canon Dusk Till Dawn show, regardless of print availability, if you were just going to pick 4 titles that you feel represent Canon Films, and they can be some of the ones we've got here too, what would those 4 titles be? And in what order?
Wow, that's tough. I am actually going to steer clear because you've shown some of the ones that would belong in there. So I will kind of push those to the side, because I know you showed Texas 2 as one of your Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 as one of your Tunnel Vision Tuesdays, I believe, earlier this year.
Correct.
And then The Apple was wonderful last year. I made the drive out for that. I wasn't going to miss seeing The Apple on a drive-in screen. But boy, out of ones you guys haven't shown yet, that's my own. I know you didn't give me that. Give me that parameter, but I'm going to go with that. I will say we have to put Revenge of the Ninja in there. That is just a great, alongside Ninja 3 and American Ninja, one of the best, and my personal favorite. That's if somebody were to force me to pick my number 1 favorite canon movie, Revenge of the Ninja would have been in there. I would say Invasion USA. It's my favorite of the Chuck Norris canon features. It's just nonstop Chuck Norris action. Very little plot, very little acting or serious. There's not really a romance subplot for Chuck to stumble through. It's just him shooting people, hanging off the side of a truck and bursting through like the glass doors of a mall, wearing denim, just more denim than any human being can wear on one body at a time.
It's a film that just plays great when viewed through a windshield. I mean, not while flying through a windshield, because then you probably can't see anything. But I mean, sitting in a car at a drive-in, certain movies are just like, this just needs to be at a drive-in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's see.
So we have Revenge of the Ninja, followed by Invasion USA. You have 2 more selections.
2 more. Well, okay, I'm going to piggyback here. I'm going to say BREAKIN 2. BREAKIN 2 is a film that didn't do as well as BREAKIN, but in the terms of, like, in the sense of canon craziness, it's wild. It takes whatever little bit of amount of being grounded in reality the first movie was and does away with it. This is a movie where breakdancing brings a dead man back to life, where cars start bouncing. It's like an old musical where everybody in the movie is breakdancing at different points. It's just
and I always thought that, even when I was a kid, the basic plot of this is they're trying to band together to save the community center, right?
Yeah, it's like an old Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland musical. It's got that great. Yeah, let's let's save the day with dance and song. That's really what it is. And wow, I have one left. One left. Boy.
Alternatively, it's like we put you in a space capsule and we're firing you out into the cosmos, and you're only equipped with a 4-disc Blu-ray changer.
Oh gosh. Well,
that's different because it's like, what films do you want to be driven slowly insane by as you run out of air? So maybe let's just keep it to the idea that you're at a drive.
Okay, let's go with the drive. And so yeah, there's two that I'm thinking of. If I'm going with the crowd pleaser, and something that would not be just my own very selfish personal pick, a movie I do love, and I think a lot of other people also love, but probably Bloodsport. And in terms of what might actually sell tickets, a lot more people I think would be interested in seeing Bloodsport than what my other pick would have been, the Norman Mailer directed Norman Mailer adaptation, Tough Guys Don't Dance, which is just a personal quirky favorite of mine out of the Cannon library.
I've still never seen that. That's one of those films that when you think Cannon films, you just think of action and comedy and wild and woolly, but sandwiched in there, like we were talking before we started, you have movies like Runaway Train and Tough Guys Don't Dance, and movies that were attempts at being prestige pictures.
This is a company that produced 8 ninja movies, more Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson movies than most people probably know existed, but they also made movies by Robert Altman, Franco Zeffirelli, Jean-Luc Godard, just all of these incredible, very well-respected names John Cassavetes found themselves part of the Cannon family for one brief period in their career.
And how long was Cannon in existence from the point of what the Apple was the first release, right?
Yeah, the Apple was their first. That was their coming out party. Under the leadership of Golden Globus, Cannon was a company that existed. Was founded by other people in the 60s, but when we think of Cannon, when most people discuss Cannon, they're looking at the 1980 onward period, but 1980 through 1994.
Wow.
So
it's such an impressive accomplishment when you see what essentially, I mean, it was more than two guys, but at its heart, it was two guys just cranking out all these movies that so many people still talk about and love. And that was just like, in many ways, more iconic a studio than some of the major studios were during that period. You can laugh at the films and say, haha, cheap Cannon films, but we're still talking about them.
Yeah, absolutely. These are movies, if you, like myself, grew up, fell in love with movies at the video store. And that's my origin story. You couldn't escape them, but there are people who also, they saw their movies based on what was on cable all the time, and Cannon was also what you could count on one of your cable movie channels, 24-hour movie channels. If you turned it on at 2 a.m., there would be a Cannon movie. If you turned it on at 7 a.m., there would be a Cannon movie on one of those channels. They were inescapable.
They were a powerhouse. Jeff, did you have any questions for Austin?
No, this has been a great interview. I loved learning. Can't really think of a thing at the moment. It was great.
I'm sort of the same way when we do these chats. Like I don't have a lot to add to it. I just want to hear all these stories. And I have the books, just so you know. I'm not looking to get all this information for free. There's a lot more information in the books than here. We just let you have the ability to expound and delve into things and explore things a little bit more with the voice than we do on the page. But those two books sit proudly on my shelf. I cannot wait for the third one. I cannot wait for you to join us on August 12th at Shot Out of Cannon. I hope it does well enough so that we just can keep doing these things because there's so many movies and they're so fun. And I love having these chats,
Oh, this is a blast, and I can't wait to get out there again. I've told people this anytime I talk about the Mahoning. I tell them there's really not a more fun place to watch movies under the stars. It's a magical little piece of land out there in the middle of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much. We put on the kind of shows we want to see, maybe selfishly,
Yeah.
and then charge other people for the privilege of joining us to watch them. So we will see you and you who are listening, hopefully, on August 12th at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater in Lehighton, Pennsylvania for Exhumed Films and the Mahoning's presentation of Shot Out of Cannon, a 4-film Cannon Films 35 millimeter Dusk Till Dawn show. We hope Bronson eradicates all of the bad guys before the sun comes up and doesn't wipe them off the screen. We'll do our best. I'm sure we'll have tons of Cannon trailers too in between each of the films, like Harry likes to do. So tickets available at mahoningdit.com. Until next time, I am Mark. Jeff is Jeff. Austin is Austin. And we will hope to see you at the drive-in. Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night, and God bless you.